The scent of dying lily choked the air. Elara's fingers trembled against the cold, polished obsidian of the ceremonial altar, the only thing holding her upright. Before her, seated on a throne of wrought iron and shadow, was the man she had been sold to an hour ago. The disabled Alpha King, Kaelen Vargos. His broad shoulders were draped in a mantle of midnight fur. His hands, knuckles white where they gripped the wolf-head arms of his chair, were the only part of him that moved. A wheelchair of dark, sleek metal held him, a silent testament to the betrayal of his own body. "Do you consent to the bond?" The high priest's voice was a dry rustle, echoing in the cavernous, near-empty throne room. Consent. The word was a splinter in her heart. She could still feel the ghost of her stepmother's grip on her arm, vice-like, as she was pushed across the palace threshold. "It's an honor," she'd hissed, her perfume jasmine and deceit overpowering. "Your sister is dying. His wealth pays for her treatment. You will be silent, and you will be grateful." Elara's eyes lifted from the intricate patterns on the floor, a mosaic of wolves and shattered moons, to the king's face. He hadn't looked at her once. His profile was carved from winterstone, sharp jaw, a slash of a mouth set in a grim line, eyes the color of a storm-locked sky fixed on some distant, painful point. A terrible, beautiful ruin of a man. Rumors said a rival pack's poison had stolen the use of his legs and the warmth from his soul on the same night. Rumors said his wolf was crippled, silent. Her voice was a thread, swallowed by the vast silence. Her consent was a currency already spent. She was the purchase sacrifice, the healthy, unwanted daughter traded for the cherished, ailing stepsister. She was 18 and her life was no longer her own. She consents. The voice that answered was not the priest's. It was low, graveled with disuse, and it came from the throne. Kaelen's eyes slid to her, finally. The impact was physical, a cold shock that stole her breath. There was no warmth in that gaze, only a weary, bottomless bitterness. "The contract is sealed. The ceremony is a formality. Proceed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you." The priest nodded, unease flickering in his eyes. He raised a silver dagger, its edge catching the light of 100 flickering candles. "By blood and vow, under the eyes of the moon goddess, let this union be." "Enough," Kaelen's command cracked through the incantation. "The blood vow is for true mates. This is a transaction. Leave us." The priest faltered, then bowed deeply, retreating with his attendants. The heavy oak doors thudded shut, sealing Elara in a cavernous room with the silent, brooding king. The dying lily on the altar seemed to weep their scent, alone. The reality of it pressed down on her. She was alone with a stranger who despised the sight of her, in a palace that was now her cage. She wrapped her arms around herself, the white silk of her wedding gown a mockery of purity, suddenly too thin, too revealing. "Come here." His voice was a whip in the quiet. Elara flinched. Every instinct screamed to run, but where? She forced her feet to move, one in front of the other, until she stood before his wheelchair, close enough to see the fine lines of torment around his eyes, the shadow of stubble along his jaw. He smelled of frost and pine and something deeper, darker like old parchment and unresolved pain. "Look at me," it was not a request. She lifted her chin, meeting his stormy eyes. She would not cower. She had lost everything, but she would not give him her dignity. For a long moment, he just studied her, his gaze traveling over her face with a clinical detachment that made her skin feel cold. "Elara?" he said, her name a foreign sound in his mouth. "Sold by the woman who claimed to raise you. To me, do you know why I agreed to this purchase?" She swallowed, the ache in her throat raw. "My stepmother said, 'You require an heir.'" The words tasted like ash. She was a broodmare, bought for functioning ovaries. A harsh, humorless sound escaped him. "My court requires an heir. My council requires a symbol of stability. His hands flexed on the chair again, a spasm of frustration. "I require nothing from you. You will have rooms far from mine. You will perform public duties when commanded. You will not speak to me unless I address you. You will not touch me, ever. Do you understand? Each directive was a nail in the coffin of any faint, foolish hope she hadn't realized she'd been clutching. The loneliness that stretched before her was an abyss. She nodded once, her lips pressed together to stop their trembling. Good! He looked away, dismissing her. Marlin will show you to your chambers. You are a fixture here, Elara, a silent, obedient fixture. Forget whatever romantic tales of mate bonds you've been fed. This is not a story. This is a life sentence for us both. An elderly man with kind eyes and a somber expression, Marlin, the steward, materialized from the shadows near a side door. He gestured for her to follow. As she turned, her hip brushed against the arm of his wheelchair. Kaelen recoiled as if scalded, a low, animal snarl ripping from his throat. I said, he growled, the air suddenly crackling with a latent, dangerous energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. Do not touch me. Tears, hot and shaming, finally welled in her eyes. She fled, the soft patter of her slippers echoing like frantic heartbeats on the stone floor, following Marlin into the labyrinthine depths of the cold, dark palace. Her chambers were a gilded prison. Larger than her entire former home, they were furnished in shades of gray and silver, beautiful and utterly lifeless. A fireplace held cold ashes. The massive bed, canopied with sheer curtains, looked like it had never been slept in. The balcony doors showed a view of the sprawling, mist-shrouded royal grounds and the dark outline of the forbidding pine forests beyond the wall. Marlin bowed. Dinner will be brought to you here, your grace. The king dines alone. Is there anything you require? My freedom. My old life. A kind word. No, thank you, Marlin. Alone again, the silence was a weight. She walked to the balcony, the stone railing biting into her palms. Somewhere out there, her stepsister, Serafina, was receiving the expensive, experimental treatments her sale had purchased. Serafina, who had always gotten the best of everything, even their mother's love. And now she had gotten Elara's future, too. A soft knock preceded a maid entering with a tray. She set it down, curtsied, and left without meeting Elara's eyes. The food looked exquisite and tasted like nothing. She was a ghost already. Night fell, draping the palace in deeper shadows. Elara, still in her wedding gown, sat by the dead fireplace. The encounter in the throne room played on a loop in her mind, the bitterness in his eyes, the recoil at her accidental touch. A life sentence for us both. What had broken him so completely that he saw a forced wife as just another chain? Driven by a restlessness she couldn't name, she slipped out of her room. The corridors were deserted, lit by flickering sconces. She wandered, not aiming for anywhere, just moving to escape the confines of her own mind. The palace was a maze of opulence and gloom, tapestries depicting great battles and hunts, statues of fierce wolves staring with blank marble eyes. She turned a corner and stopped. A set of double doors, darker than the others, stood slightly ajar. A faint, warm light spilled out, and with it, a sound. A ragged, pained groan, followed by the shattering of glass. Her breath hitched. It was his voice. Kaelen's. Against every dictate, every warning, she crept forward. Peering through the crack, her heart hammered against her ribs. It was a private study, walls lined with books. And in the center, Kaelen was on the floor. He had hauled himself from his wheelchair, which lay on its side. His powerful arms trembled as he tried to drag his unresponsive lower body towards a low cabinet, his face a mask of agony and fury. A broken tumbler and a dark spill of liquid whiskey from the smell lay nearby. This was not the proud, cold king from the throne room. This was a man in a private hell, wrestling with his own wreckage. He stilled, his head lifting, his nostrils flared. He'd caught her scent. Before she could flee, his voice, rough with pain and fury, sliced through the quiet. I know you're there. Spying is a poor habit for a silent fixture. Elara pushed the door open, stepping into the room. I wasn't spying. I heard a noise. Leave. He didn't look at her, his focus on righting his wheelchair, his muscles corded with the strain. But she didn't. She saw the sheen of sweat on his temple, the utter humiliation burning in his eyes, the way his hands shook. This was the wound, raw and exposed, the source of all the bitterness. Without thinking, she moved. She righted a small table, picked up the larger pieces of glass. Then she walked to the cabinet, fetched the decanter and a clean glass. She poured 2 fingers of amber liquid and walked toward him. He froze, watching her approach with the wary hostility of a cornered beast. "What are you doing?" "You dropped your drink." Her voice was surprisingly steady. She knelt, placing the glass on the floor within his reach, then carefully began picking up the shards nearer to him. "I said never touch me," he snarled, but it lacked the earlier force. It was a defense, a wall she had just seen crumble from the other side. "I'm not touching you," she said softly, gathering the sharp, wet fragments. "I'm cleaning your broken glass." He was silent for a long moment, his breathing harsh in the quiet room. He watched her, his stormy eyes tracking her every move. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, heavy and intense. The air between them changed, charged with something new. Not just pain and anger, but a startling, palpable awareness. Her fingers brushed a sliver of glass near his knee, and a jolt, strange and electric, shot up her arm. She snatched her hand back. His eyes widened, just a fraction. Had he felt it too? He reached for the fresh glass of whiskey, his fingers closing around it. But instead of drinking, he held it, his gaze locked on her face, now illuminated by the firelight. The harsh lines of his expression softened into something unreadable, complex. "You should be afraid of me," he murmured, the words more a question than a statement. Elara sat back on her heels, meeting his gaze. The longing in her for connection, for a sliver of kindness in this desolate place, warred with the hurt of her sale, the fear of his rejection. "I am," she confessed, the truth laid bare. "But you seem more afraid of yourself right now." A shock went through him. His knuckles turned white around the glass. No one, she realized, ever spoke to him like this. No one dared see past the king to the broken man. The moment stretched, thin and taut. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the palace, a clock chimed a lonely hour. Then his free hand moved. Not towards her, but towards the wheelchair. He grasped a lever, and with a mechanical hum, part of the frame shifted, allowing him to leverage himself up. He did it with brutal, practiced efficiency, refusing her help before she could even offer it, settling back into the chair with a finality that slammed a door between them once more. The vulnerable man on the floor was gone, replaced once again by the Alpha King, but his eyes, when they found hers, held a new, unsettling intensity. "Go to your rooms, Elara," he said, his voice once more a command, but it was quieter now, threaded with something that sounded like confusion. "And do not wander the halls at night again. The palace is not safe." It was a warning, but not the one she expected. It felt less like a threat and more like a confession. She stood, the shards of glass cupped carefully in her hand. She nodded, turning to leave. "Elara!" She paused at the door, looking back. He was staring into the fire, his profile stark. "The Lely," he said, almost reluctantly. "I hate them." "Have them removed from your chambers tomorrow?" It was nothing. A trivial order about flowers. But it was the first time he had acknowledged her existence as a person who might have an environment to alter. It was a crack in the ice, microscopic, but there. "Yes, Your Majesty," she whispered. Back in her cold, gray room, the shards of glass disposed of, Elara stood again at the balcony. The mist had thickened, swallowing the world. She replayed the scene in the study, his pain, her inexplicable boldness, that electric jolt, the haunted look in his eyes as she left. "I require nothing from you," he had said. But as she climbed into the vast, empty bed, the scent of frost and pine and old pain seemed to linger in her senses. And the silent, aching thought echoed in the dark. What if I require something from you? The cliffhanger was not a shout, but a whisper taking root in her soul. And as she finally closed her eyes, she could have sworn far off in the depths of the sleeping palace, she heard the faint, echoing sound of a wolf's howl full of agony and longing and pure, untamed power, This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The howl echoed in her bones long after the sound faded into the mist. Elara sat bolt upright in the cavernous bed, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than before. It was a living silence, one that seemed to listen back. Had she imagined it? A trick of the wind through the ancient pines, or the desperate longing of her own heart-given voice? Sleep was impossible. The encounter in the study played behind her eyes on a relentless loop. The shocking vulnerability of Kaelen on the floor, the electric jolt from the glass, the storm of confusion in his gaze. You seem more afraid of yourself. The words felt dangerous now, hanging in the dark. She had trespassed far beyond the boundary of silent fixture. Just before dawn, a soft knock announced the maids. They entered, their eyes carefully averted, and began the silent ritual of drawing a bath, laying out clothes, a high-necked gown of dove gray, somber and simple. One of them, a young woman with russet hair, gathered the vase of wilting lily from the bedside table. "His Majesty's orders, Your Grace," she murmured, barely audible. So he had remembered. The tiny crack in the ice felt infinitesimally wider. "What is your name?" Elara asked, her voice rough from disuse. The maid looked up, startled. "Liana, Your Grace." "Thank you, Liana. Please, no more Lily." "Anything else?" A flicker of something sympathy perhaps crossed Liana's face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. "Yes, Your Grace." After bathing and dressing, Elara was escorted not to a dining hall, but to a small, sunlit morning room where a solitary breakfast was laid. Marlin appeared as she finished her tea. "His Majesty has requested your presence in the West Library in 1 hour for a briefing on your public duties. A guard will accompany you. Requested, not commanded." The word choice felt deliberate. The palace was a machine of subtle nuances, and she was a clumsy new cog. The West Library was a cathedral of knowledge. 2 stories of soaring shelves laden with books, ladders on rails, and a long, scarred oak table. Kaelen was already there, seated at the head of the table in his wheelchair. He was dressed in dark, formal attire, every inch the king, the man from the study floor completely concealed. 2 other people were present, a severe-looking woman with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, and a younger man with sharp eyes and an eager posture. "Sit," Kaelen said, not looking up from a document. Elara took the chair farthest from him. "This is Lady Thessaly, head of royal household affairs," he said, gesturing to the woman. "And Lord Jackson, a senior member of my council. They will instruct you on the expectations of your role." Lady Thessaly's gaze swept over Elara like a cold inventory. "Your primary function is symbolic. You will appear at weekly court audiences, seated beside the king. You will not speak. You will attend public ceremonies, the Moon Festival, the remembrance of the founding. You will smile, but not broadly. You will project serenity and obedience. Your wardrobe," she said, eyeing Elara's simple gown with distaste, "will be addressed. You are a reflection of the crown's stability, not a person with individual tastes." Each word was a stitch, sewing her into a tighter costume. Elara kept her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral, even as her insides shriveled. Lord Jackson leaned forward, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Politically, your presence is a signal to the border pacts. The king even—" He hesitated, a barely perceptible glance at Kaelen's chair. "In his current state is securing his line. It discourages ambitious challenges. Your fertility is a matter of state interest. A physician will attend you monthly to confirm your cycle and health." The blood drained from Elara's face. She felt stripped bare, reduced to a biological function. She couldn't stop her eyes from flying to Kaelen. He was staring at Jackson, his expression utterly blank, but a muscle in his jaw twitched violently. He said nothing in her defense. He had, after all, set these terms. "Are there questions?" Lady Thessaly asked, her tone implying there should not be. Elara found her voice, a thread of steel woven through the tremor. "Am I permitted to walk in the gardens?" Thessaly looked affronted by the irrelevance. "Escorted, and only in the southern terraces during designated hours. Your safety is paramount. Your captivity is paramount. Elara thought. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Kaelen finally spoke, his voice flat. That is all. Leave us. Thessaly and Jackson rose, bowed, and departed. The door clicked shut, leaving the vast library silent save for the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. The distance between her and Kaelen felt like a chasm. He rubbed a hand over his face, the gesture weary. Their assessment was crude, but not inaccurate. This is the reality you were sold into. I understood the reality, Elara said, with steel in her voice turning brittle. Hearing it spelled out so clinically was an education. He looked at her then, his storm-cloud eyes taking her in. The physician is non-negotiable. The court must believe an error is possible. But the examinations will be conducted by Veren, a woman of discretion. You will not be distressed. It was the barest shred of consideration, but after Jackson's bluntness, it felt like a lifeline. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. The gardens, he continued, looking back at his papers. You may walk there unescorted, but stay within view of the South Guard Tower. I cannot guarantee your safety if you wander. From whom? The question slipped out. His eyes snapped to hers, intense and guarded. From anyone. The palace walls have ears, and the world beyond them has teeth. You are a new piece on the board. Pieces get tested. He paused. The hell you heard last night. Did it frighten you? Her breath caught, so he knew she'd heard it. It sounded lonely. A profound, unsettling stillness settled over him. Lonely, he repeated, as if tasting the word. It's a patrol, a warning to the forest, nothing more. He was lying. She felt it in her marrow. That howl had been pure, personal anguish. He pushed his wheelchair back from the table. Your first court audience is tomorrow. Thessaly will bring your gown at dawn. Do not be late. He began to wheel himself toward a private door at the rear of the library. Your Majesty? He stopped, but didn't turn. The flowers in my room. Thank you. He was silent for a long moment. Lately remind me of my mother's funeral, he said, so quietly she almost didn't catch it. Then he was gone, the door closing with a soft, final sound. The next day was a lesson in silent endurance. The gown Thessaly brought was a masterpiece of oppressive elegance. Silver thread on deep blue, a color that brushed her jawline, sleeves that tapered to points over her knuckles. It was beautiful and suffocating. She was laced into it, her hair coiled and pinned until her scalp ached. The throne room was full today. A sea of faces, curious, disdainful, calculating, all turned toward the dais as she entered on Marlin's arm. Kaelen was already seated on his throne of iron and shadow, an immovable monument. She was led to a smaller, less ornate chair beside him, close enough to feel the chilling aura of his presence, but separated by an uncrossable mile. The audience began. Petitions from merchants, land disputes from border lords, reports from generals. Kaelen listened with sharp, relentless focus, his questions incisive, his decisions swift and final. His intelligence was formidable, a stark contrast to the physical constraint of his chair. She saw the respect in some eyes, the fear in others, and in a few, a flicker of pity they quickly hid. Halfway through, a lord from the eastern province stepped forward. My king, we rejoice in your new union. May it bring the strength and succession the kingdom awaits. His eyes slid to Elara, lingering on her midsection with vulgar anticipation. We look forward to fruitful news. The air around Kaelen seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look at the Lord, but at his own hands, resting on the arms of his throne. The kingdom's strength, he said, his voice dangerously soft, has never and will never rest solely on the womb of one woman. Your rejoicing is noted. Your implication is an insult to your queen. Withdraw. The Lord paled, stammering an apology before scurrying back into the crowd. A shockwave of silence rippled through the court. He had called her queen. He had defended her not as a possession, but as a position worthy of respect. Elara's heart hammered against the tight bodice of her gown. She kept her eyes forward, her face a serene mask, but inside, Something warm and defiant sparked to life. The rest of the audience passed in a blur. When they were finally dismissed, Kaelen wheeled himself off the dais without a word to her, surrounded by his council. Elara was led away by Marlin, her body thrumming with adrenaline and confusion. Days settled into a strained pattern. She saw Kaelen only at formal meals, where they ate in a silence so thick it was a third presence at the table, and at weekly audiences, where he was the formidable king and she the silent statue. But the library encounter and his defense in court had altered the atmosphere. His orders about her freedom, while still restrictive, were followed. The maids, led by Liana, began to look at her with less detachment, sometimes even offering a timid smile. She took her walks in the southern gardens, a manic, the world and narrowed to the hum in her hand. For 3 days, Elara moved through the palace like a ghost touched by lightning. The memory of the spark Veren, he called it, was a brand on her soul. Every mundane action was filtered through its shocking light. The slide of a brush through her hair, the taste of soup, the rustle of her skirts. It all felt different. The very air seemed charged with the potential she now recognized as him, and he had vanished. Kaelen was absent from meals, from the library, even from their weekly audience, which was postponed with a terse, official notice citing the king's pressing state matters. The palace, never warm, grew colder in his purposeful absence. It was a retreat, a fortified withdrawal more absolute than any command. Ignore it, he had begged. He was trying to make the bond a lie by erasing himself from her world. But the bond didn't feel like a lie. It felt like a deep, resonant string plucked inside her chest, now vibrating toward a silent source. She found herself pausing in corridors, turning her head as if she heard her name, only to find empty space. She dreamed of a gray wolf with storm-cloud eyes, silent and pacing behind bars of light. On the 4th day, a summons came, but not from him. Lady Thessaly requested her presence in the royal solarium. The woman stood before a wall of glass overlooking the northern mountains, her posture rigid. "Your Grace," she said, without turning, "it has come to the council's attention that you have been approaching the king in private settings." The gardens. Elara's heart sank. Someone had seen them in the alcove. The king found me there. "We spoke. The king," Thessaly said, turning, her eyes like flint, "does not need distractions. His focus must be on the stability of the realm, on navigating the threats from the border pacts who smell weakness. Your role is to be a placid, decorative presence, not a complication." Is speaking to one's husband a complication? The defiance was back, fueled by the hum in her blood. "He is not your husband in any sense that matters to the court," Thessaly snapped, then lowered her voice, stepping closer. "Listen to me, girl, you were bought. That is a harsh truth, but it is your foundation here. Build a life of quiet comfort upon it. Do not reach for a crown of feeling he cannot give you. You will only get cut, and you will make him bleed in the process. His pain is not a toy for your romantic fantasies." The words were meant to shatter her. Instead, they crystallized her resolve. This wasn't a fantasy. The spark was real. His pain was real, and it called to her own. "What do you know of his pain?" Elara asked softly. Thessaly's mask faltered, revealing a glimpse of something older, sadder. "I served his mother. I saw the bright, fierce boy he was before the poison. I see the shadow that remains. Adding the torment of a mate bond he believes he's unworthy of is a cruelty. Leave him be." She left Elara standing in the sunlit room, her words a cold counterpoint to the warmth on the glass. A cruelty was her very existence, her unwanted, fated connection, a new form of torture for him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Driven by a need for something, anything, that wasn't silence or warning, she sought out the one person who had shown her a sliver of kindness. She found Liana in her small sewing room, mending a linen. "Liana," Elara said, closing the door softly. "The word Veren, do you know what it means?" Liana's needle stilled. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Your Grace, where did you hear that word? It doesn't matter. What does it mean? Liana set her sewing down, her voice dropping to a whisper. It's the old tongue. It means fated touch, the first spark of a true mate bond. It's what happens when destined skin meets destined skin for the first time. Her gaze dropped to Elora's hands. They say it feels like coming home. Elora's knees felt weak. She leaned against the doorframe. And if the Alpha's wolf is silenced? Liana's expression filled with a profound pity. Oh, Your Grace? Then it is a tragedy. The bond is of the soul, and the wolf is the soul. For the spark to come, his wolf must not be as silent as he believes, but for the bond to fully form. She shook her head. It would be like trying to complete a song with only one voice. It would be a constant aching incompleteness. For both, the validation was a double-edged sword. It was real. And it was, as Kaelen and Thessaly said, a potential source of endless pain. A mate bond with a broken alpha, the ultimate cruel joke of the moon goddess. That night, the howl came again. It was closer this time, raw and ragged, tearing through the velvet dark. It wasn't lonely. It was furious. It was an agony. It was a scream against bars. It came from the west wing's wing. Elara was out of her bed and into the corridor before rational thought could catch her. She wore only her thin nightdress and bare feet, but the cold of the stone floors barely registered. The hum in her blood was a compass needle, swinging wildly toward the source of that sound. She passed a startled night guard, ignoring his murmured, "Your Grace," and kept moving, a moth drawn to a flame of pain. The door to his private chambers was ahead, a massive slab of darkened oak. 2 guards stood post, their faces shifting from professional blankness to acute discomfort as she approached. "I need to see him," she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. "His Majesty is not to be disturbed, Your Grace," one said, not meeting her eyes. "He's in pain." "I heard him. It is not your place," the other began. The howl came again, this time choked off into a strangled, human groan of despair from behind the door. The sound lanced through her. Without another word, she moved forward. The guards hesitated, caught between orders and the undeniable, desperate authority in her eyes. In that second of hesitation, she grasped the handle and pushed the door open. The room within was dark, lit only by the dying embers in a massive fireplace. It was sparsely furnished, military in its neatness, and cold. And in the center, by the hearth, was Kaelen. He was on the floor again, but not struggling with his chair. He was curled on his side, his body taut as a bowstring, trembling violently. His skin gleamed with sweat in the firelight, his face contorted in silent suffering. His eyes were wide open, glowing with that faint, erratic lupin blue, like a guttering candle. "Kaelen!" She rushed to him, falling to her knees. "Get out!" he gasped, the words torn from him. "Elara, please. What's happening? The moon, it's too full. My wolf, it's trying to shift. It can't. It's tearing me apart from the inside." A violent shudder racked him. "It's not safe. I can't." Control the pain. She didn't flee. Instead, she reached out. Her fingers hovered over his clenched fist. "The Veren," she whispered. Would it help? Would it quiet the wolf? Terror and desperate hope warred in his glowing eyes. It could make it worse. I could hurt you. You won't. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. Her mate, her broken, proud, suffering mate. She laid her hand over his. The spark this time was not a tiny arc. It was a conflagration. A wave of silvery gold light erupted from their joined hands, washing over them both, filling the dark room with the scent of ozone, pine forests, and wild rain. Elara's vision whited out. Sensation overloaded her, not just her own, but his. The searing, metallic pain of the poison's legacy, the furious, howling frustration of the caged wolf, the deep, echoing loneliness that was older than his injury. And beneath it all, a bedrock of strength, of intelligence, of a kindness so long buried he'd forgotten it existed. And he felt her in return. Her betrayal, her quiet grief, her resilient hope, the startling, pure clarity of her compassion. The way she saw him, not the king or the cripple, but the man in the ruins. The bond didn't snap fully into place. It was like a bridge, half-built, spanning a chasm. They could feel each other on either side, but the central connection was murky, incomplete. Yet, the mere presence of that bridge changed everything. His trembling began to subside. The glow in his eyes faded from frantic blue to his normal stormy gray, though they remained wide, dazed, fixed on her. The wolf, having sensed its mate, having touched her essence, quieted from a rampage to a low, yearning whimper inside him. He was still in pain, but he was present. He was looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. Elara, he breathed, her name a revelation on his lips. He slowly, achingly uncurled his fist and turned his hand beneath hers, threading his fingers through hers. The contact was electric, but now it was a current of recognition, not shock. His palm was rough, scarred. Hers was soft. They fit. You shouldn't be here, he said, but his grip tightened. You called for me. I howled at the moon. It's the same thing, she said, tears finally spilling over. They were for his pain, for her loneliness, for the terrifying, beautiful impossibility of this connection. He reached up with his free hand, his movements stiff but deliberate, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was so tender it shattered her completely. I told you to ignore it, he murmured, his own voice thick. I can't. It's in my bones. It's in yours. The heavy silence settled, filled only by the crackle of embers and their shared breath. The pretense was gone. The contract, the transaction, lay in ashes at their feet. This was something else entirely. What do we do? She asked, the question hanging the charged air. I don't know, he admitted, the mighty Alpha King brought low by a truth he couldn't command away. The bond is dormant, partial, without my wolf's full presence. It may never fully form. We would be bound in eternal almost, she repeated. It sounded like a special kind of hell. To be so close to belonging to a love legends spoke of and forever held at the brink. It would be a life of wanting what I cannot give you, he said, agony returning to his eyes. A true mate bond is a union of souls, of bodies, of power. I can offer you fragments. Elara looked at their joined hands, at the light that seemed to linger faintly around their skin. She thought of the empty crown of her old life, the gilded cage of this one. She thought of the spark that felt more like home than any place ever had. Maybe fragments are enough to start with, she whispered. A groan from the doorway shattered the moment. Lord Jackson stood there, his face pale with shock that quickly morphed into calculating displeasure. He had seen the fading glow, their joined hands, her disheveled state. Your Majesty, Jackson said, his voice slick, I heard a disturbance. I see the Queen is providing comfort. The word comfort was laden with vulgar implication. But perhaps this is unwise. The court's perception. Kaelen's expression, which had been soft and open, iced over in an instant. The king slammed back into place. He didn't drop her hand, though. He held it tighter, his gaze locking on Jackson with deadly intensity. The court's perception, Kaelen said, his voice the cold steel of a blade being drawn, is that their king and queen are united. That is what you are witnessing, Jackson. Unity. Is there a problem with that? Jackson bowed, a sharp, shallow motion. Of course not, Your Majesty. Forgive the intrusion. I am merely vigilant for your well-being. His eyes flicked to Elara, a flash of pure venom in them before he retreated. The door closed. The fragile intimacy was poisoned by the outside world. Kaelen released her hand, the loss of contact of physical coldness. He will talk, Kaelen said wearily, passing a hand over his face. They will all talk. They will see hope where I see a cliff edge. Let them talk, Elara said, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. It was the strength of the bond, however incomplete. It was hers. You defended me once as your queen. Maybe it's time we stopped pretending I'm not. He looked at her, a slow, wondering respect dawning in his eyes. alongside the ever-present fear. You don't know what you're asking for. The scrutiny will be relentless. The expectations will become a millstone. I was sold, Kaelen. Scrutiny is a lighter chain. She stood, her legs shaky but firm. I should go. Before the whispers become screams, he nodded, unable to argue. As she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Elara. She turned. Tomorrow, he said, the words seeming to cost him. Meet me in the library, not for a briefing, to talk. It was a surrender, a tiny monumental crack in his fortress walls, a beginning. Tomorrow, she agreed. Walking back through the silent halls, the hum in her blood was a steady, quiet song. The bond was a tragedy and almost a potential source of endless pain. But as she slipped back into her cold room, she realized the howling within her had stopped. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt not alone. She felt a thread, fragile and luminous, stretching through the stone and darkness, connecting her to a storm-eyed king. And she knew with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her that she would follow that thread anywhere, even off a cliff. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The thread between them hummed with a new, fragile tension. Elara slept fitfully, her dreams a tapestry of glowing blue eyes and the cold, calculating gaze of Lord Jackson. When dawn came, it felt less like a new day and more like the calm before a storm. The palace knew. She could feel it in the way the servants' glances lingered, in the hushed conversations that ceased when she entered a room. The news of her being in the king's chambers in the dead of night had spread like fog through the stone corridors. Lady Thessaly arrived as she was breaking her fast, her expression grim. The council is in an uproar? Jackson is framing your visit as a desperate ploy for influence, or worse, a manipulation of the king's vulnerable state. It was neither, Elara said, setting her spoon down with a quiet click. Intentions matter less than perceptions in a court of wolves, Thessaly replied. But her tone was less cutting than before. There was a weary acknowledgement in her eyes. He will use this to push his agenda, which is to declare the king unfit to produce an heir and install a regent from his own faction. Your presence and any attachment complicates his narrative. You have made yourself a target, girl. The title girl no longer felt like a dismissal, but a warning from a seasoned soldier to a new recruit. Elara nodded. Thank you, Lady Thessaly. The older woman paused at the door. His mother would have liked you. She had the same quiet fire. With that, she was gone. The library meeting loomed in Elara's mind, a beacon and a trial. She dressed with care in a simple dress of deep green, the color of the forest pine she could see from her balcony. She wanted to look like herself, not the palace's doll. When she entered the West Library, he was already at the large table, a map spread before him. He looked up and the air left the room. The memory of the night before, the shared pain, the explosive Veren, his fingers and hers hung between them, a living thing. Close the door, he said, his voice neutral. She did, leaning against the solid wood for support. Jackson is making his move, Kaelen began, getting straight to the heart of it. He gestured to the map. The border packs, led by a rival alpha named Garrick, are rallying. They've been testing our defenses for months. Jackson has been liaising with them. I believe he's promised them concessions in exchange for supporting his regency. My apparent weakness is their opportunity. Elara moved to the table, looking at the map dotted with markers. The political reality was a cold splash of water. Their personal turmoil was a spark next to this potential wildfire. What can you do? What I have always done, he said, a fierce pride flashing in his eyes. Rule, strategize, command loyalty from those who still remember what I was and respect what I am, he sighed, the weariness returning. But a king whose wolf is silenced, whose mate bond is. He trailed off, looking at her. It's a vulnerability they will exploit. Garrick will challenge me directly if he senses enough advantage. A traditional alpha challenge is a fight of wolves. I cannot shift. I would have to forfeit or be killed. The stark truth of it chilled her to the bone. Her mate would be forced to choose between humiliation and death. There must be another way. There is. He locked eyes with her. We give them a different story. We present a united, strong front. We make the partial bond our strength, not our shame. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. How? By acting as if the bond is complete. By appearing together, speaking together. By letting the court see a king and queen, not a cripple and his purchased bride. He said it clinically, but his knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the table. It is a performance. But in politics, performance is power. A performance. After the searing honesty of the night, it felt like a regression. And to what is real, Kaelen? Where does the performance end? He wheeled back from the table, turning his chair to look out the high window. The Veren is real. The ache is real. The impossible situation is real. But I cannot offer you more than a performance of a marriage, Elara, not while my wolf is caged. To promise more would be a deeper cruelty. The rejection, though expected, was a fresh wound. She had felt his soul. He had felt hers, and he was still choosing to hide behind walls. So, I am to be your prop in this performance. A more active one than before. He turned, his eyes blazing. You are to be my queen, he growled, the alpha power in his voice making the books on the shelves tremble. Not a prop, my partner in this fight. My voice when I cannot be heard, my strength when my body fails. That is what a mate is, in any pack that deserves the name. Even if the bond is silent, the partnership need not be. It was the first time he had spoken of her as a partner. The first time he had framed their union as anything other than a burden or a transaction. The shift was seismic. What do you mean me to do? She asked, her voice steady. Tonight, there is a state dinner for the remaining loyal lords. Jackson and his faction will be there, watching. Garrick's emissary may even be in attendance, hidden. You will sit beside me. You will speak when moved. You will look at me as if... He hesitated, struggling. As if you see the man, not the chair. Can you do that? As if you see the man? She already did. She saw the man in pain, the king in control, the wolf in chains. Yes, he gave a tight nod. Good. There is something else. He wheeled to a cabinet, unlocking it with a key from his pocket. He withdrew a long, narrow box of polished dark wood. This was my mother's. She would have wanted you to have it. Elara opened the box. Inside on a bed of black velvet lay a necklace. It was not the delicate, glittering jewelry she expected. It was a piece of raw, powerful beauty, a single teardrop-shaped moonstone, the color of a winter sky, set in a claw-like embrace of twisted silver. It looked like something a wolf would prize, natural and fierce. It's stunning, she breathed. It's a declaration, he said quietly. Moonstone for the goddess, silver for our pack. Wearing it tonight will send a message everyone will understand. It was a gift, a tool, and a claim, all in one. Her fingers trembled as she lifted it from the box. The stone felt cool against her skin. Will you help me put it on? The request hung in the air. A test, an invitation. He moved behind her. She held her hair up, exposing the nape of her neck. She felt the brush of his fingers as he took the ends of the necklace, heard the soft click of the clasp. His hands lingered for a fraction of a second on her shoulders, warm and heavy. The hum between them intensified, a low, resonant chord. He took a sharp, quiet breath behind her. When he wheeled back in front of her, his eyes were dark, his expression unreadable. It suits you? The dinner was a battlefield laid in white linen and crystal. The great hall was filled with the powerful of the realm. Their sense predatory, anxious, curious mingling with the aroma of roasted meat and rare spices. Elara entered on Kaelen's arm, Marlin having discreetly helped her place her hand on the king's offered elbow. She wore a gown of midnight blue, and the moonstone necklace glowed against her skin like a captive piece of the moon. A ripple went through the crowd. She saw it all, the approving nods from the older lords who remembered Kaelen's mother, the calculating stares from Jackson's faction, the outright hostility from a few. Jackson himself smiled, a thin, cold slice of a thing. They took their places at the high table. Kaelen was a figure of imposing stillness, his authority a palpable force. Elara sat straight-backed, the moon stood a comforting weight. The dinner proceeded with strained civility. Toasts were made to the king's health, to the kingdom's prosperity veiled words laced with doubt. Then, as the main course was served, Jackson rose. "My king, honored guests," he began, his voice oily smooth. "We are all heartened to see such unity at the head of our table. It gives us hope for the future. Yet, hope must be grounded in reality. The border seethes. Our enemies grow bold, questioning the strength that has always been our shield." He turned his gaze directly to Kaelen. "Strength, traditionally, is demonstrated. It is felt in the power of an alpha shift and the roar of his wolf. The people and our allies need a reminder. Perhaps a ceremonial showing? A display to quiet the whispers?" It was a public, polite demand for Kaelen to try to shift, knowing he would fail. The humiliation would be absolute. The hall fell silent. All eyes were on the king. Kaelen's face was a mask of stone. Elara felt the fury and shame rolling off him in waves. She saw his hand tighten on his goblet. He was trapped. Before he could formulate a lethal reply, Elara felt the words rise in her throat, powered by a protective fury of her own. She stood. The movement, so sudden and graceful, drew every eye. She felt Kaelen's startled gaze on her, but did not look at him. She looked at Jackson, her voice clear and carrying in the silent hall. "Lord Jackson speaks of traditional strength," she said, her tone cool. "But what is tradition if it blinds us to true power? My mate," she emphasized the word, letting it ring out, "holds this kingdom together not with the snarl of a wolf, but with the cunning of a strategist, the justice of a ruler, and the unwavering will of a king who has faced darkness and not broken. His strength is in every law that protects the weak, in every border secured by his command, in the loyalty he inspires in those who value substance over spectacle." She turned her gaze slowly across the room, making eye contact with the loyal lords. "Would you follow a beast who can only roar or a king who can think? The whispers my lord hears are not from the people. They are from those who profit from doubt." A stunned silence followed. Then, from the back of the hall, an old lord with a grizzled beard slammed his fist on the table. "Well said, your grace." A murmur of agreement, tentative then growing, spread through the loyalists. Jackson's face flushed with rage. He had been outmaneuvered not by the king, but by the girl he dismissed as a pawn. Elara sat down, her legs trembling under the table. Kaelen was staring at her, his eyes wide with shock, and something else, a dawning, blazing pride. Under the table, his hand found hers, gripping it tightly. The Veren sparked, a private, defiant flare between them. The dinner ended soon after, the tension too high for false revelry. As they left the hall, Kaelen leaned close, his voice for her alone. That was magnificent. Back in the corridor leading to their respective wings, the victory felt fleeting. The confrontation had only heightened the stakes. As they reached the junction where they would part, a guard came running, his face ashen. "Your Majesty, riders from the Border Garrick's pack. They've crossed the river. They carry a black banner, a declaration of war." And with them, the messenger added, his eyes darting to Elara with pity. "They have a woman. She claims to be the queen's stepmother." "She bears documents." Ice flooded Elara's veins. Her stepmother. Documents. The proof of her sale, the contract that reduced her to a transaction. Garrick and Jackson weren't just attacking Kaelen's strength. They were going to publicly destroy her legitimacy and, with it, any claim of unity. Kaelen's expression turned to granite. "Ready the council, now." He looked at Elara, all pretense gone. "Come with me." The council chamber was chaos. Jackson looked almost pleased. The loyal lords were grim. In the center of the room stood Elara's stepmother, Leora, draped in traveling clothes, her face a mixture of triumph and fear. She held a rolled parchment. "Your Majesty," she simpered, bowing, "I come only to ensure the truth is known, to save you from a deceitful union." She unrolled the parchment. A bill of sale. For the girl, Elara, signed by me, her legal guardian and witnessed. Purchased for a sum that now funds my dear Seraphine's recovery. She is not a queen. She is a commodity you bought. How can a transaction be a sacred mate bond? The room erupted. Elara felt the world tilt. The shame she had buried surged up, threatening to drown her. She was laid bare, her worst truth weaponized. Kaelen was silent, staring at the document. Then he began to wheel himself forward toward Leora. The crowd parted. He stopped before her, his gaze lifting from the parchment to her face. "The price," he said, his voice so quiet everyone strained to hear. "You sold your daughter for a price." "Stepdaughter," Leora corrected smugly. "And yes, for 10,000 gold crowns." Kaelen nodded slowly. Then he looked at Elara, his eyes holding hers. "Then it is fortunate," he said, his voice rising to fill the chamber, "that her worth to this kingdom and to me is beyond any ledger." He turned back to the council. "The document is real." The transaction happened. A gasp went up. Jackson smiled. "But a queen is not made by a lack of price," Kaelen continued, his voice gaining thunder. "A queen is made by courage under fire, by loyalty in the face of betrayal, by a heart that can love a broken king and see a man where others see a cripple." He wheeled to face Elara completely. "You asked what is real, Elara? This is real. My trust in you is real. The bond that you have nurtured, despite every reason not to, is real. They sold you to me. But I," he said, and his voice broke, raw with emotion, "I give myself to you, freely, as your mate, as your husband. If you will have what remains of me." It was not a performance. It was a raw public vow. A king kneeling in spirit before his queen. Tears streamed down Elara's face. The humiliation burned away, replaced by a love so fierce it stole her breath. She walked to him, through the stunned silence, and knelt before his chair, taking his face in her hands. She didn't care about the audience, about Jackson, about the war at the gates. "I see you, Kaelen," she whispered, her voice carrying. "I have always seen you, and I choose you." Broken bonds and all. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was their first kiss. And as their lips met, the incomplete bridge between them flared with a light so brilliant it blinded the room. A sound like a distant, mighty howl echoed not in the air, but in every shifter's soul in the chamber. The moonstone at her throat blazed like a star. And deep within Kaelen, behind the poison-forged bars, his silenced wolf lifted its head. It did not break free, but for the first time in years, it growled. The cliffhanger was not an ending, but a glorious, terrifying beginning. The bond was still partial, the wolf still caged, the enemy at the gate. But as they broke the kiss, foreheads resting together, the world had shifted. They were no longer a transaction or a performance. They were a union. And they would face the coming storm together. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.